So I'm not gonna lie, I almost took the bait here. I was looking on social media and I saw this tweet from the Athletic podcast where the folks over there talked about the idea of the Canadiens going after Elias Pettersson and what it would take. And I was like, oh, do I want to start out the show with that? Is that really, like, the best thing to go out there and talk about at this time? And then I was like, you know what, maybe not really. We can probably talk about that later in today's show. But for now, let's go out there and talk about just the Montreal Canadiens. Because I wanted to turn your attention to an idea that was discussed a few days ago from Eric Engels on Sportsnet.ca that expands upon what Montreal's trade plans could be and whether or not those plans are in the midst of changing at this moment in time. Is Kent Hughes already changing his plans? This show, as always, is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Go out there and check out the first link in the description to get some free months on Express, save some money, and you'll also be helping out the channel in the process. Go out there and take advantage of this offer. But when it comes to Eric Engels' mailbag from January 14th, we'd already discussed this. Canadiens mailbag. What will it take to re-sign Jake Evans? And the Jake Evans conversation is an interesting one because he's a guy who isn't necessarily too young. He's not old, definitely not, but he is in a position where he's playing some of the best hockey of his career, and a whole bunch of teams around the NHL, like New Jersey, like any sort of a cup contender that needs a middle to bottom six top center. Middle to bottom six top center. Is that an oxymoron? Yeah, it kind of is. But somebody who needs one of the better middle or bottom six centers. We can say that instead. Jake Evans, for a top penalty killing, face-off winning, middle to bottom of the lineup guy, is one of the best. And as a result, because of his age, because of the development he has taken, because of his contract situation, there have been reports, saying, hey, the Habs could trade this guy, or the Habs could re-sign this guy, Evans wants to stay, etc., etc., and so obviously, the Montreal Canadiens being in a position where they're at right now, where they are in competition for a wildcard spot, where they are trying to string together more wins, sure, you can say they've kind of fallen off a bit defensively the past little while here. Sure, they had a really good stint end of December, start of January-ish, but now they're sort of going back to their old ways, who really knows. Either way, the fact that they are competitive right now bodes well for keeping Jake Evans. And this article goes out there and talks about some of the other players that could be in a pretty similar spot. Let's scroll down to this question asked by Joey to Eric Engels. How many of Dvorak, Anderson, Armia, Matheson, Savard, and Evans do you think will be on the team next season? This isn't asking Engels, okay, what's the latest scoop on trades? It's just asking Engels for a prediction. Out of these guys, who's on the team next year? Engels then replies this. I'm going to say Evans, Anderson, and Matheson are all with the Habs at the start of next season. I'd be shocked if Dvorak re-signed. I still think it's most likely, but not guaranteed, he is traded between now and the deadline, regardless of where the Canadiens are in the standings when they arrive at that juncture. I wouldn't say the same of Savard and Armia, who are also both on expiring contracts. If the Canadiens remain tied up against the playoff picture, or they're sitting in a spot come the deadline, I could see the Habs holding on to both of these players. Now, David Savard, Joel Armia, these are players that we have talked about in trade capacities before. We've discussed the idea of the Habs trading them and sending them over to playoff teams, and Savard could get a first-round pick and all this stuff. It's a pretty interesting conversation to dive into when you think about the returns. I'm not sure David Savard would necessarily be the most valuable guy on the market, but he's definitely a good enough player to get moved and to be targeted, especially with his playoff experience, etc., etc. Joel Armia also, I think, is in that spot where his veteran presence and his leadership and his versatility on the wing, the way he protects the puck and how he opens up space, he's a pretty good player. I've been a really big fan of Armia for a few years now, and I know a lot of people won't necessarily relate. People like to see the flash, people like to see goals and assists be put up on the board, but I'm a really big fan of penalty killing, for example. So, Joel Armia, super underrated guy. Savard, Pretty fair valued player. A lot of teams would probably be interested in these guys, alongside of Jake Evans were they actually to find themselves on the market. But this is where we dive into Kent Hughes and the potential of him changing his trade plans. Because back when the article was made, January 15th, the Montreal Canadiens, I think they were in a much better spot than they are right now when it comes to the playoff race. Right now, at the time of recording this audio, the Habs are in a pretty tight race with Detroit, Columbus, and oddly enough, Tampa Bay. Do you want to say Tampa Bay? I'm not really too sure. But Montreal has 53 points in 50 games played. They are 2 points out of the wildcard spot, the final wildcard spot, which is held by Tampa. Tampa is probably going to find themselves in a top 3 spot in the Atlantic, considering Ottawa has 56 points in 50 games played. It's a pretty close race in that division for both the third place spot and the second wildcard spot. And so with that in mind, I think a lot of Canadiens fans should probably start adjusting their perspective as to what they think the team can do. Because I think heading into the season, there was always this looming idea over the team. Okay, there are some guys whose contracts are expiring and yada yada yada, you can trade them away. And Jake Evans went on a really nice goal streak and everybody was like, oh, look at that, his trade value is increasing, he's gonna get moved and they're gonna get a first round pick for him, which is great. But then a lot of people were like, wait a minute, he's like actually doing very well and he's solid, and his improvement from a few years ago to now has been very good to watch, and he's still relatively middle-aged. I say middle-aged. Jake Evans is 28 years old, folks. That's not really old, right? So now you're seeing fans saying, okay, maybe they actually just decide to re-sign him. Who knows? And now for Savard and for Armia, I think these guys have really won fans over with their play the past few weeks here, because I've been seeing a lot of Armia love. Been seeing a lot of David Savard love. That little turtle that he did at the end of the Tampa Bay game where he stood over, or not even stood over, he kind of just kneeled over the puck to kill off the clock in the final seconds. Yeah, that earned a lot of brownie points in Montreal Canadiens social media discourse. I saw a lot of people saying, oh, I've seen enough. That's it. We gotta re-sign this guy. Screw trading him for a first-round pick. We're making the playoffs, and he's making clutch plays like that. Especially when you consider the fact that he is from Quebec and that he likes playing in Montreal. And this is a hometown thing for David Savard. Obviously, there is an affinity there towards the organization from the player. He's 34, but who cares? What, you're going to get a first-round pick? A guy who's going to be in the 25th, 27th, 28th overall spot in 2025? Guess what? That guy's not going to help out your hockey team until maybe 2027. That guy's not going to be a National Hockey League player probably until 2029, maybe 2030. Like, sure, first-round guys, they can do well in the National Hockey League, especially the guys taken towards the end of it. But it's like, okay, you think about the guys that the Habs have. Philip Machar, 2022, first-round pick. That guy's not an NHL player. Owen Beck, borderline NHL player. You're not going to get significant contributions out of those dudes until maybe 4 years out. We're not even 4 years out for Philip Machar's draft case. So, for the first-round pick argument, yeah, I get it. It's nice to build for the youth. Joel Armia, same thing. He'll probably fetch yourselves a draft pick or something. But then again, for Armia, like, what are you going to get? You're not going to get a first. You're going to maybe, like, a second and a fourth or something like that. A nice prospect. That guy's not going to help out the team until 2020, whatever, if ever at all. You're not going to get much value out of a fourth-round guy. So, Montreal, they really have nothing to lose, I would say, when it comes to keeping these players around, maintaining that competitive spot in the race, and forcing their hand at the rest of the Atlantic, saying, hey, we're Montreal, we're here, we are still in this competition, we are just a few points out, we can get hot at a moment's notice. Obviously, we're waiting for Cayden Goulet's assessment before we really make conclusions on that, but if Cayden Goulet, rumors are true that he only got cut and he's not really going to be out for a while, if that's true, then okay, we can probably see the Canadiens remain in some sort of a competitive state, and still, like with Jayden Struble in the roster, I get it, he's no Cayden Goulet, but there is still an okay amount of depth on that blue line. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about the Montreal Canadiens changing their trade plans, Kent Hughes potentially holding on to his assets instead of going the deep route and trading everybody away. I'll leave a link in the description of the article we read from, and also the ExpressVPN affiliate page will be there as well. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about the Montreal Canadiens and their trade situation. I hope you enjoyed this video. Sign on, and bye.